Kia ora koutou, ko anuta ko inua. I am one of the technicians of the Managing Invasive Species Group at the Bioeconomy Science Institute, formerly Manaki Whenua Landcare Research, and I will be your host today. So welcome everyone who is joining us for last Biosecurity Bonanza webinar. Our two presenters today are Indigo Michael, one of our Pacific Natural Enemies Natural Solutions coordinators, and Zane McGrath, a senior technician and lab manager working on biocontrol of weeds from the Bioeconomy Science Institute. Today, they will discuss current biocontrol programs across the Pacific to protect and restore these fragile ecosystems and build long-term resilience against invasive species. As with all our webinars, we do encourage some questions. So you have on top of your screen a Q&A sessions. Feel free to add your questions during the presentation, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. If there are any questions that have been answered, don't worry. We will answer those via a post-webinar. They will be transcribed and answered. So now I'm pleased to hand over to Indigo and Zane, who will share their research with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Cool. Okay. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Indigo. I am a program coordinator on the Natural Enemies Natural Solutions program, which you're going to hear a little bit about today. I'm joined by my colleague Zane, and together we're going to give a bit of an update on two of our biocontrol projects in the Pacific. So thank you all for joining. It is a real pleasure to be able to talk about this today. I've been part of the team for the last year and a half almost, but we've had active biocontrol projects in the Pacific for a decade now, and it's constantly moving and constantly changing, and there's always a need for sustainable long-term solutions to address invasive weeds in the Pacific. Because we know that invasive species are the leading driver of biodiversity loss in the Pacific, islands are particularly vulnerable and are prone to invasion by invasive species because they lack natural competitors and predators that control populations in their native ecosystems. So when we're talking about invasive weeds, we're talking about plants that are growing too well in the wrong place, that are having significant negative impacts on the economy, the environment, and human and animal health. There are already hundreds of plant species that are having negative impacts in the Pacific, and that list keeps growing, especially in the face of climate change, where things like rising carbon dioxide and rising rainfall rates can favor invasive weeds within plant communities. And because of the movement between the Pacific Islands, and because a lot of these invasive species were moved around by people, many Pacific Islands share the same invasive weed problems like myellominute and African tulip tree. Because of that, it means that we're able to have a regional approach to management and build regional capability for invasive weeds management. It's also important to understand that biocontrol has been used in the Pacific for over 100 years. It's not new, but it has become a forgotten tool. So part of our mahi in revitalizing biocontrol as a sustainable long-term solution in the Pacific involves reminding each other that it's not new, it's something that can work, and it is safe. We know that when we go to countries like Niue and Samoa, where weeds like lantana and giant sensitive plant have been successfully controlled using natural enemies in the past, that it works and it is safe. So the NENS program is part of a wider service called the PRISMs that brings together different organizations that work towards the scaling up of invasive species management in the Pacific. So the PRISMs currently provides technical support across 6 regional programs for the Pacific region, and the Natural Enemies Natural Solution Natural Solutions Program is responsible for addressing widespread invasive weeds using biocontrol. So African tulip tree is a fast-growing evergreen tree native to Central and West Africa. It can grow up to 24 meters tall, and it produces these distinctive bright red flowers. It can reproduce by suckering, and it forms these dense thickets that often outcompete native vegetation. It's one of only 30 terrestrial plants identified on the 100 worst alien species list. So it's definitely a heavy hitter invasive. And because of that, and because of its impact in the Pacific, it's been a target of biocontrol since 2008, when the Secretariat of the Pacific Community, or SPC, first funded surveys looking for natural enemies in African tulip tree's native range. So we now have active biocontrol programs for African tulip tree in 5 Pacific islands, so Vanuatu, Cook Islands, Samoa, Fiji, and Tonga. So yeah, it's present in pretty much every non-atoll island in the Pacific, from Papua New Guinea right up to the Marshall Islands and across to French Polynesia and Hawaii, which aren't actually pictured here. It was first introduced to the Pacific in the 1930s and was moved around a lot because it's pretty, it's an ornamental, and it grows really quickly, but it jumped the fence and spread beyond where it was planted and eventually became invasive. So it's become quite a significant and aggressive invasive weed in the Pacific, and it pops up as a priority weed in several of the Pacific Island countries that we work in. It invades and dominates both agricultural and natural areas, and in a lot of places, it's completely taken over farms and forests. Controlling it is both labor and time intensive and often quite impractical. In Fiji, it's estimated to cost farmers over 1,300 New Zealand dollars per hectare per year to manage, and the average household is expected to spend 10% of their weekly time spent managing crops, managing African tulip tree. It's also important to recognize that in most Pacific cultures, there's a direct relationship between the health of the whenua and the well-being of the people. So when we get invasive species like African tulip tree taking over, it's not only affecting those ecosystems and people's livelihoods, but also their relationship to the land and their culture and identity. So there's a clear need in the Pacific for a long-term, sustainable, safe solution to manage African tulip tree. So the first agent that was developed and released is the African tulip tree mite. It's from Ghana and was developed in collaboration with Rhodes University. It was found on 80% of all the trees that were examined during the field surveys in Ghana, and it's highly host specific and will only damage African tulip tree. The mites cause this galling, so these galls here, and the galls act as nutrient sinks, which divert the nutrients that the tree would otherwise use for growth and reproduction. So it's these galls here that we actually look for when we're looking for signs of establishment in the field, because the mite's too small to be seen with the naked eye. So the adults, so it was released in Rarotonga in 2017 and Vanuatu in 2022, and then Vavau and Tonga in 2023. So we've also got the African tulip tree beetle, which is also from Ghana and also was developed in collaboration with Rhodes University. It's only a couple millimeters long, and it's got these powerful back legs that allow them to jump around like little fleas. The adults feed on the leaves, and the larvae actually burrow into the leaf surface and mine the leaves. So this was released in Rarotonga in 2021, and it's now well established. And these are our colleagues, Viliami and Emeline, who are responsible for rearing the beetles in Tonga before they're released. It's also been imported into Samoa as of this week, where they'll begin rearing before release as well. So yeah, quick summary. The mite's been released in 3 countries, and monitoring surveys have confirmed that it's widespread where it's released and causing damage. And the flea beetle has been released in the Cook Islands, where it's now widespread. It's being reared in Tonga and Samoa, and we're hoping to import it into Fiji soon. So beyond releasing both agents in Fiji and Samoa and the beetle in Tonga and Vanuatu, we are searching for new agents of African tulip tree. We ideally want something that will attack a different part of the plant, particularly ones that will reduce its reproduction and spread. So since 2023, we've been working again with Rhodes University to look for potential agents that will target the reproductive structures of the plant. So the flowers, the pods, and the seeds. So this is my colleague Quentin, alongside our collaborators Sonia Kenfack and Ian Patterson in Cameroon in 2023, surveying African tulip tree plants for natural enemies. During these surveys, they found damaged and infested seed pods, which was found to be caused by a stem-boring moth that destroys the seeds inside the pods and feeds on the shoot tips when the pods aren't available. So Rhodes University is currently trying to establish a culture in containment so that they can undertake host range testing. And we're hoping that this will be developed as a biocontrol agent to be used as part of the suite of agents that we have against African tulip tree to hopefully increase the cumulative stress to the plant when all the agents are present at the same time. So yeah, thank you. A big mahi, of course, to MFAT and SPREP, who make this work possible and who provide the resources and support for us to help solve some of these weedy issues happening in the Pacific. Of course, to Rhodes University, who've been very involved in the surveying, the development of agents, and the releases in country. And of course, to our in-country partners, who we depend on for guidance at every step in the Natural Enemies project and make each project possible. Yeah, I'll hand over. Oh, thank you for joining. If you want updates, please feel free to follow us on Facebook at Pacific Nens. I'll hand over to Zane now, who's going to talk to us about Solanum torvum in Vanuatu. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks for that, Indigo. Okay, kia ora koutou. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Zane, and yes, I'm going to be talking to you about a beetle that we have released in Vanuatu for the control of an invasive weed, Solanum torvum. I'd just like to say in Bislama, miglad blo lokyu. Happy to see you all here. So let's get into it. So the target plant is Solanum torvum, and in Vanuatu they refer to it as pico. It's a close relative of eggplant, so it's in the same subgenus. It's native to the Antilles and possibly Central America. There's still some debate around here. And now it has a pantropical distribution, so that also includes a number of Pacific islands. So pico in Vanuatu, it's a major weed of cattle pasture in 5 different islands. And we surveyed farmers throughout Vanuatu, and we found that they indicated that on 41% of them, they indicated that it was the most important weed. And a further 40% of them indicated that it was the second most important. So herbicide use in Vanuatu is very minimal. That's because of the costs around the use of it. And often slashing is the only method for its control. And yeah, this loss of productivity and the control costs, they're currently massive. So the benefit to cost ratio of introducing a biocontrol agent should be highly favorable. So let's look at the biocontrol agent. So yeah, on the left here, that's the adult. And then on the right here, we have the larvae munching away on the leaf. The Latin name is Leptinotarsa undecimlineata. It's a chrysomelid, so it's a leaf beetle. We sourced it from Jamaica. And importantly, it should be not confused with a very similar species with a very similar Latin name, Leptinotarsa decimlineata. Thanks for that, taxonomist. But yeah, commonly known as Colorado potato beetle. And yeah, important for in our case is that the difference between this Colorado potato beetle and pico beetle is that, yeah, the Colorado potato beetle is a large pest of crops in cooler climates. So through our testing in the laboratory, we found that pico beetle was able to complete development when forced to feed on eggplant. But we found that eggplant was ultimately a lower quality host. So when given a choice between eggplant and pico, we found that that pico was ultimately the main choice. They almost exclusively attacked pico plant. And when we tried rearing them over multiple generations, they basically declined to extinction when they were just fed on eggplant. So together, despite these tests, they show some signs that they'll be non-target on eggplant. That's if their preferred host isn't available, but any damage should only be short-lived spillover attack. And in Jamaica, where we sourced the beetle, there hasn't been any record of it attacking eggplant, so this is very reassuring. And yeah, this is despite hundreds of tons of eggplant being grown there annually. And a pico beetle is also not known as a pest on eggplant anywhere else it occurs. Ultimately, pico beetle was approved for release in Vanuatu in 2024. And so we had to come up with a bit of a release strategy because when we imported pico beetle into our containment facility in New Zealand for testing, it only came with about 6 to 8 females, so quite low numbers. And then on top of that, we had limited space in our containment facility, so we basically had to cull a lot of beetles and keep the population within that 30 to 50 adults at a time range. And that was over quite a long period, so 5 years, or give or take about 10 to 15 generations. So the population has potentially been genetically bottlenecked. And so this might reduce the ability of the beetles' ability to adapt to a new environment in Vanuatu, but we're uncertain about this. And we've seen some very good examples in New Zealand where we've imported biocontrol agents from very small numbers and released them in small numbers as well. But they've gone on to be very successful. So a good example of this is the heather beetle. And then another example of populations being low but then taking off later are these conservation success stories that seem to be quite common in New Zealand. So we've seen species like the Chatham Island black robin basically come back from the brink of extinction. So yeah, investing in importing new genetic material to help buffer the pico beetle might not be necessary. To test this, we've come up with a release plan. So we're making 3 releases per island. We're spacing them far enough apart to hopefully establish isolated populations that should diverge genetically over several generations before they eventually mix and mingle when their populations grow large enough and they might experience some genetic rescue. So how we're testing this, so we've preserved some genetic material from the founding populations. So that includes keeping the parents basically of the lines that we introduced to these release sites. and we're going to regularly sample beetles to study the impact of genetic drift, local adaptation, and the potential need that we might have to mix and mingle a species ourselves through possibly moving populations around the island or in dispersing them between different islands as well. So that might be another way to get around that genetic bottleneck if need be. So far we've released on 3 islands, Afate and Santo, 3 releases on each island, 96 beetles at each site. This was in November 2024. And then we took a small plane over to Malakula in April 2025, and we completed 3 more releases, 2 large releases and then 1 smaller one, a total of 940 beetles. And so far we've seen some very promising results. So you can see Calmer right here looking very stoic next to a dead plant of Pico. It's basically being stripped bare. And you can kind of see this is it's kind of looking like this plant is going down that route as well. You can kind of see it's basically a skeleton of what it was. And there's beetles, basically feeding and munching their way through that plant. And yeah, we set up some herbivory monitoring as well. So we looked at the amount of herbivory that's going on before and after, and you can see that there's already a huge amount of damage that's going on to the plants. And we also looked at the number of herbivores on the plants before we released Pico beetle, and it was basically non-existent. There probably weren't many herbivores at all, just some generalists feeding. But yeah, after you see there's multiple Pico larvae or adults on the plant now. And so the word has got out of this early success, and landowners are keen to get their hands on them. But I guess this could be a good problem. But yeah, this could jeopardize our genetic work that we plan for, because there'll be no guarantee that populations will remain isolated for as long as we first thought. So future work, we're going to continue monitoring the release sites. We want to have some systematic evidence to show that the Pico beetle is doing its job and it's doing well. So we want to continue the monitoring of the herbivory levels. And we want to support our release plan and the genetic work by regularly sampling Pico beetles. And to do our due diligence with eggplant, we want to see if our prediction was right or wrong, to see if it was not a field host. And we'll do this by setting up field trials in Vanuatu. And a big shout out and thank you too much to Biosecurity Vanuatu, the New Zealand MFAT for their funding, EARTC, the Department of Conservation and Environment, and Department of Agriculture in Vanuatu. Thanks very much.
Thank you both. Very, very interesting. Thank you, Indigo and Zaina, for your presentations. So a reminder that the audience can feel free to add their questions in the Q&A session. And perhaps I can already start with a question for you both. How long you think it will take before we can start to see some results, either with the African tulip tree agents or for the Pico beetles in Vanuatu?
Well, I guess I can just speak for the Pico beetle. I mean, we're already seeing great results with the damage they're doing to plants. I mean, we've already seen some plants that have basically cocked it from the feeding damage, and then you can see plants that are making its way that way there as well. So and just to say that the people of Vanuatu, I've seen just random people and speaking to them about what we're doing, and they already know about it. So if that's anything to go by, I mean, it looks like it's very promising. But yeah, we'll still have to keep monitoring and see if this trajectory keeps going in the right direction.
Excellent. And before we give Indigo the time to answer, can you please, Zane, stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, sure.
Excellent. What about you, Indigo? Would you think it would be a short or rather long-term
Yeah,
result?
I think in general biocontrol takes time. Like we're always looking at decades timescales. But if we look at Tonga, for example, it was the African tulip tree mite. We're already seeing widespread dispersal on Vava'u after only a year after the release because it is wind dispersed. It's so small. And we can already see that it's stunting the growth of smaller trees and seedlings. So it definitely, as Zane said, it's something that we need to continue monitoring. And there definitely already was recognition that we would need more agents to manage African tulip tree anyway. So yeah.
Good. All right, let's jump to the questions we have in our Q&A. From Jason Smith, do you think a stronger biosecurity focus will help and limit establishment of the invasive weed species in the Pacific? And how would that be envisaged due to the relative ease of migration and travel between those islands and regions? Do you have an idea about how that could be implemented?
I guess prevention is always more effective and less costly than managing invasions after they occur. I think increasing biosecurity in the Pacific comes down to supporting capacity building and ensuring that countries have access to the expertise, the funding, the infrastructure to maintain effective biosecurity systems and to ensure consistent consistent border controls and protocols.
Thank you, Indigo. Yes, it seems to be very important to protect those environments. Zane, during your presentation, you mentioned slashing as a clearance strategy in Vanuatu over herbicide use. Do you think that slashing would cause any issues to spread the seed or perhaps even causing plant matter to even spread the plant?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd imagine it would probably go especially if the plant is seeding or it's got the fruit on. Yeah, I mean we've seen examples where moving around machinery and stuff can actually spread invasive weeds, and that's a possibility, yeah. But like I mentioned, unfortunately, that's one of the only options, and they're basically relying on that in some cases, or sometimes they just give up on fields. But yeah, so they're basically relying on the grass to hopefully outcompete the pico plant and shade it out. But yeah, it is a risk, but it seems to be one of the only control methods they have at their hands.
Related to that, they seem to also often use burning techniques. And do you think that it would be a viable control method, burning the material? Do you think that would actually kill the plants and the seeds altogether?
Yeah, I'm not too sure about burning. I don't think it's commonly used in Vanuatu as far as I'm aware. But yeah, obviously burning comes with other issues, and I don't think, yeah, the soil and the plants in Vanuatu might not respond very well to fire because they haven't really adapted to that. I don't think fire is a common occurrence on the Pacific region.
Another question from Mary. Are there specific agricultural crops that these invasive species tend to overtake on farms?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is the grass that's used for pasture for cattle in Vanuatu. That's the main reason why we've introduced the pico beetle, is to help the cattle farmers. Yeah. And
I know that African tulip tree in Samoa and Fiji is an issue for coconut and cocoa plantations. But I think just in general, it tends to invade. it's all farms and natural areas.
Yeah, I think for Solanum torvum, it needs sunlight, so it might not be invading those sort of natural areas. So it might not be competing so much so with native plants.
Right. And a comment from Barry Scott. Thanks, Indigo and Zane. For information, African tulip tree is still in the lagging phase in Niue, in the lag phase in Niue. So there is an opportunity for mechanical control with prospect of eradication. I hope it will work. I have recently formed a self-funded group called Friends of Niue, with 12 of us visiting 3 weeks ago to assist the environment team there with manual removal using chainsaws and secateurs combined with herbicide pasting. All 3 infestation sites were cleared at that time. We will follow up with another trip scheduled next year. So it's good to see often getting rid of an infestation very early on is extremely important, as probably Zainan could confirm that.
Yeah, sorry, what was that? Oh no, I was just writing down.
To eradicate as soon as possible, so that's what they are trying to do in Niue before start invading the entire island.
Definitely good idea, because you can see how bad Spathodea is on other islands, so if you get to it early, that'll help with that, definitely.
And last one question from Ivan Cameron. What are their migratory and distribution range? So I suppose we're talking about the agents. Do you foresee that these agents could become isolated from their food source over time?
Well, for the mites, I guess their distribution range will be quite broad within the island. I think that we're wanting to see if they have established on some of the smaller islands in Tonga around Vanuatu. But because biocontrol agents are so dependent on their host, their populations naturally decline when the weed becomes scarce, which is it's like a self-regulating process. So that's part of what makes our approach so safe, is that we can trust that when the weed starts to become scarce, the biocontrol agent will as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Zain and Indigo, for sharing your research today. We'll make sure to share a copy of this webinar recording, and we'll also share the Q&A session with you shortly. On behalf of the Bioeconomy Science Institute team, thank you for joining us today. Kia kite.